The Adirondack Mountains. They are a rugged and demanding place, not easily given to taming by man. Against incredible odds, men and women have settled here to carve a living out of the wilderness. This is their story, and the story of the industries and villages they created. Isolated and unmapped before 1830, the region was slow to yield to settlement. Yet over the centuries, people have been drawn to these mountains by the lure of boundless natural wealth. Indians were first to enter the mountains, gathering what they could from the forest before passing on. During the wars for possession of the colonies, British and French armies crossed the eastern foothills in their battles for control of Lake Champlain, building forts along the way to protect their claims. The soldiers were followed by frontiersmen and families who moved into the region from all sides, clearing the more fertile river valleys for crops. The rolling hills of the Champlain and St. Lawrence valleys were soon dotted with farms and pasture land. Port towns along the shores of Lake Champlain gained early prominence as shipping centers, while other settlers pushed into the more forbidding interior.
The only highways we had was the waterways, the rivers and the lakes. And you'd carry from one lake to the other to a river that you could navigate over the carries and so on like that.
These frontiersmen used water power to mill the produce of their farms and saw the timber of the forest. Their villages soon developed into more than primitive frontier outposts. Citizens recognized the wealth of the land around them, in the forests covering the hills, and in the earth itself.
When I was in high school, they used to bring all the softwood down for the pulp mills down the river. You could walk across that pond on wood. I'm not kidding you. It was solid from one end to the other.
In the spring of the year, when the lumberjack were all out the woods, it was just like walking in New York City. Both sides of the street and right across the street, and I'm telling you, there was people.
Lands along the Hudson, Scroon, and Lower Racket rivers were first to be heavily logged, and as early as 1813, their waters were declared public highways to allow for the free passage of thousands of logs floating downstream on spring floods. New York became the #1 lumber-producing state in America. Millions of board feet of lumber were sawn in mill towns, and thousands more were shaped into furniture, doors, and architectural details. In the southern Adirondacks, the bark of hemlock trees was peeled off for use in the tanning industry, which provided shoe and boot leather for factories all along the East Coast. The development of the railroad made it possible to bring trees out of the forest far away from any rivers, and great expanses of land were bought up by lumber companies. These companies built new towns like Piercefield and Wanakina, complete with workers' houses, schools, churches, and stores.
That was the only industry in Conifer lumber mills. They had their own railroad, their own engines, engineers, and everything. And the majority of the people from Conifer, they brought their family up there, and their kids stayed right on, worked with the company.
A growing paper and pulp industry gave rise to towns like Newton Falls, where shifts at the mill regulated daily life. The pioneering spirit of those who had first ventured into the mountains was embraced during the Industrial Revolution by powerful new companies prospecting for raw materials. As early as Revolutionary War days, iron ores along Lake Champlain had been refined in lakeshore furnaces. Now investors were exploring new resources.
My father always told me, he said, get the hell out of the mines and stay up. But he didn't want me in the mines. You get a lot of close calls down there. Things that happen, you wonder, what in the hell am I doing down here? A lot of times it was just foolish accidents. A lot of times It's Mother Nature fought back and there was nothing that you could do. You wonder and you say, well, am I next on the list?
Working as deep as 1,000 feet below ground, driven by a wage scale of pay demand only for what he produced, the miner and his family lived out a day-to-day contest with the odds. Entire villages with names like Mineville and Old Forge were established in isolated mountain regions to excavate the ores and smelt the iron. By the last half of the 19th century, 3 of the nation's largest iron mines lay in the hills bounding the Champlain Valley, while other ores and minerals were mined throughout the range. As in the remote logging areas, many of these towns were company-built and company-maintained. Towns like Aux Sable Forks, Lion Mountain, and Benson Mines traced their origin and survival to a single mining company.
Hell, you get a job, you had a family, you had to work. And when they tell you to do something, you did it. Because they owned you. They owned the house, they owned everything. Everything there was, even your soul, I think.
Mining towns were close-knit communities of native families and recent immigrants from Scandinavia, Poland, Italy, and Eastern Europe.
If your father was skilled in the mines, all the neighbors would be there, even after the funeral. They'd give you this or they'd give you that. It was such a small town, and you had to help each other, regardless of what nationality you were. It was a big family, even though they spoke different languages.
Throughout the Adirondacks, dozens of communities were established to support iron-related enterprises. Even a convict-staffed operation in Dannemora, and their fortunes rose and fell with the industry. In the same way, many other towns prospered with mills to manufacture products as diverse as nails, boilerplate, textiles, furniture, and paper. While most industries of the Adirondacks extracted materials from the ground and forest, the citizens of Saranac Lake became famous for marketing that most intangible of commodities, the life-giving qualities of fresh mountain air.
On a cold, wintry morning, the train used to get in at 6 a.m., and the taxi met the train, and you were driven to the sanatorium, which took you up Park Avenue, which on that morning, following a beautiful ice storm, looked like a winter fairyland. And I said, like Brigham Young when he discovered Salt Lake City, this is the place.
Throughout the 19th and into the 20th century, one of the leading causes of death in America was a communicable disease called consumption, now known as tuberculosis. There was no cure. In 1873, Dr. Edward Livingston Trudeau, dying of tuberculosis, came to the Adirondacks to die amidst peaceful surroundings. Instead, he found the combination of fresh air and ample rest restored his health, and he began to encourage others to follow his form of treatment. The Trudeau Sanatorium became known throughout the world for its success in treating tuberculosis. As the number of patients grew, private homes throughout the village were altered and new buildings constructed to serve as cure cottages. Each cottage had its own open porches where patients spent their days and nights out in the fresh air all year round.
This was heaven, really. Didn't bother me at all. The place was so wonderful. People were so friendly. This was a sharing experience. Everybody else there had tuberculosis. And there were great people there, just some wonderful people. It was very cosmopolitan. There were people from all over the world. And life was very good.
The allure of crystal clear air was not limited to those seeking relief from illness. By the 1890s, railroad lines traversed the Adirondacks, carrying mountain products out of the region to markets in surrounding cities and returning with carriage loads of urban tourists eager to explore the wild. Guidebooks and magazine articles spread their stories of the Adirondacks as an untouched wilderness. The first resorts were built along the shores of the lakes, where steamboats met the railroad lines, but soon elaborate hotels could be found deep within the mountains. Captains of the industries which had exploited the wilderness built sprawling summer camps where they could experience the woods in their own way.
You're talking 2- and 3-story buildings that are 20, 30 rooms to a building, and they may have 2 or 3 buildings interconnected or on the property. A lot of times they say they were roughing it.
Local families found summer jobs in private camps and great hotels, and they spent the long winter months crafting the rustic decor so much in demand by their employers. By the turn of the century, even the extremes of winter became an attraction. The Lake Placid Club introduced the Norwegian sport of skiing to an enthusiastic group of members, and a new industry was born. The advent of the automobile and the expansion of a modern highway network opened the last frontiers of the Adirondacks to everyone. Motels, cabins, and amusement parks sprang up along the roadside, catering to city dwellers escaping the urban wilderness for a natural one. New York State's designation of the region as a forever wild park has altered the relationship of man and the environment. Recreation has become the most popular enterprise of the Adirondacks, while many other industries have waned, leaving behind a far greater wealth of resources than they were ever able to consume.
Well, they've been lumbering Whitney Park since the early 1900s, and mister, I like to know how many millions and thousands of cords of wood they've taken off it. You couldn't clear cut Whitney Park in 20 years. Boy, there's some wood on that place.
Lumbering continues, though in a drastically different form, requiring more machines, but fewer men. Although mining continues sporadically, the remaining operations cannot support their once dependent communities. The evolution of antibiotics made the fresh air cure for tuberculosis obsolete, although curing has left its mark on Saranac Lake, and Trudeau's pioneering medical research continues today. Frontiersman, immigrant, entrepreneur, and tourist, all have entered the Adirondacks for the simple purpose of taking from the woods that which they needed to survive and prosper. Not content to be transient, however, they built industries and towns. Civilization in all its forms went with them, and though we call the Adirondacks forever wild, they are more likely a place where nature and the works of people will forever make room for one another.
Up here, you get to be an individualist. You take the life you want, fine, you live it.
I just like the mountains, loved to hunt and fish. We had a good time. I guess that was the reason I stayed there.